Good evening, everyone. My name is Justice Beatty, and on behalf of the South Carolina State Nuclear Waste Team, including myself, Jaden Briggs, Samuel Mitchell, Amonte Middleton, Albany Miner, and Chandler Caraway, we'd like to welcome you to our first session of our two-part series, How Nuclear Energy Is. Thank you for our thank you for joining us tonight as we present to you an educational series designed to deepen understanding of the nuclear energy safeties and pros and cons, realities that surround it over the course of our time together. And today, again on Wednesday, our goal is to provide clear, factual, and engaging insight into this important topic. We encourage you to ask questions, think critically, participate respectfully, and enjoy your time here. Your curiosity and engagement are a valuable part of this experience. Once again, on behalf of the South Carolina State Nuclear Waste Team, thank you for being here and investing your time with learning with us. Thank you.
All right. I think we can get started here. My name is Joseph Bofi, and I am a professor, nuclear engineering professor here at South Carolina State University, and I'll be moderating this session. I'll be doing this with Ms. Anaya Ziegler, who is also joined in. We have a host of panelists here, 4 panelists, and I will let Ms. Anaya go ahead and introduce our panelists.
Hello, my name is Anaya Ziegler. I am a senior nuclear engineering major here at SC State. I am also the president of the ANS chapter here, and I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. Up first, we have Dr. Mary Lou Dunzik-Gougar. Dr. Mary Lou is a multi-phase leader in nuclear science and engineering, known for her ability to guide diverse teams towards shared research goals. She has served as a principal investigator on numerous international projects, including nuclear material irradiation, characterization, and radioactive material management. With extensive experience collaborating across universities, national laboratories, and international partners, Dr. Dunzik-Gougar is recognized for her problem-solving acumen and constant record of results-driven research. Up next, we have Nick Torin. Nick Torin is a nuclear engineer dedicated to accelerating the deployment of nuclear plants that are faster and more cost-effective to build. Deeply passionate about reactor technology, Nick contributes technical expertise with a commitment to public education through his outreach program, whatisnuclear.com. He frequently delivers talks on energy and nuclear topics at schools, conferences, and community events. In addition to his engineering work, Nick is an avid programmer with experience in Python, C++, and Java. And as an author of The Digital Superpowers 2019, a book on computing, his hobbies include ham radio, hiking, motorcycling, astronomy, sailing, and exploring ancient history and cryptography. Up next, we have Terrence Cheatham. So sorry. Terrence Cheatham is a certified lead auditor with over 12 years of quality assurance experience and 9 years in design engineering. Currently at VC Summer Nuclear Station, Chatham has delivered extensive expertise in compliance and performance-based auditing. His experience indulges oversight of design and engineering services, programs, material procurement, plant system engineering, and startup physics testing. In addition to his technical work, Mr. Chatham is active in public outreach and diversity recruitment. He has designed and implemented a successful engineering recruitment pathways for students for South Carolina universities, including South Carolina State University, the University of South Carolina, and Clemson University into the nuclear workforce. And we up next have Jacob Fritchie. Jacob Fritchie's research focuses on radiation detection applications for nuclear nonproliferation and safeguards. His thesis work involves the characterization of silicon photomultipliers, and he has conducted related research at Sandia National Laboratories. Jacob's academic and research efforts contribute to advancing detection technologies that support global nuclear security initiatives. And those are our panelists for today.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Anaya, for these introductions. Before we continue, I would like to remind everybody joining on that this session is being recorded, and so everybody stay very respectful of each other, or very respectful of each other. Also, if you are joining online and you would like to ask questions, we'll ask you to put the questions in the chat session. We will leave about 10 minutes at the end and try as much as possible to address these questions if you have questions for the panelists. Okay, before I go on, so I have a couple of questions that I'll be addressing to the panelists, and some of these questions I will direct it to a particular panelist. Some of them I will let it be opened, and there could be follow-up questions. So we should be ready for it. We have about an hour to go through this. Maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes before 8, we will kind of stop on our end and then try to address the questions that the audience have for us. So in beginning with our questions, my first question is going to be a bit much more open to all the panelists. So that means anybody can answer at this point, and probably run through everyone. And I'm going to take nuclear energy in a global perspective with my first question. When we are striving for global energy equity, how do you think nuclear energy can be introduced in developing nations in ways that promote self-sufficiency rather than dependency on foreign powers? The reason being that for developing nations, they obviously do not have the technical know-how and then the economics. So how are they going to do this where they are not so tied up to that of the superpowers? And Jacob, I think I see you up there first, so maybe I'll just call you to start.
Yeah, sure. So, in my opinion, I think that there are a few examples of recent efforts that kind of speak to this. So, the recent collaboration between the South Koreans and the UAE has shown how a nuclear power can kind of develop a workforce in a country that doesn't have any nuclear workforce and kind of teach them how to, operate these reactors on their own, on their own and develop their own supply chains. Obviously, UAE is a more wealthy example, so it may be more challenging for a country that isn't quite as developed. But I think that the superpowers could also teach these developing countries how to form a state level authority like a regulator and develop strong regulatory framework. And then from there, teach them, teach or have like workforce development kind of activities going on before the reactor is even built. So I think that this kind of stuff needs to start before you actually start building the reactor, because this stuff takes time to build up the knowledge, and also takes time to work up the supply chains. So I think if a superpower is really interested, it is certainly possible to do this, but it's a more long-term agreement between the superpower and the developing country. And they have to kind of work together. And eventually, at the start, there's going to be more of a kind of we're teaching you what's going on. Here's how you run the reactor. But over time, I feel that you could certainly teach the developing country, this is how you run the reactor, this is how you purchase the fuel, for example, and this is how you do all that kind of stuff. And then after a period of time, the nuclear superpower should be able to step back and let the developing country, do as they see fit.
Oh, you're muted, I think. Joseph, I think you're muted.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot to unmute. All right, Nick, you are on now. Once we talk about this, we know developing countries a lot of it has to do with the economic aspect also. Is there any updates from your side on how they could be helped and still not be tied up to the superpowers in terms of economics?
Yeah, it's like a really hard. It's. I don't have a great update on it, unfortunately. I mean, the being tied to the superpower is hard. I mean, the only way to not be tied at first to the big nuclear, supplier is to kind of develop a reactor technology or grab one that's sort of open source and try to develop that, more indigenously. Like there are some pretty good reactor designs that are fairly well known. So, I mean, you could imagine someone saying like, hey, we don't want to be tied to a foreign power. We're going to like totally make a nuclear power industry for ourselves. This is like what India did. So India kind of didn't sign the NPT and was like, we're going to build our own reactor. Now they did import a few designs and they were, they paid for them and then learned them. And in the beginning, China did something similar. They had money and they purchased licensing rights to buy and build a reactor that was designed somewhere else that was running reasonably well somewhere else. And then once you kind of build a few of them, they were able to build that expertise by building them, by operating them, just starting from an existing design. So that's kind of, I think that's the best we can do still is, I mean, I think the recommendation is to like look at what reactors are running best and try to get one going in a project and then do the transition where you sort of bring in the expertise by helping to build and operate it. The alternative of like what Russia's doing, where you can just they come in and run the reactor and own the reactor for you. It's very appealing in the sense that like you don't have to have any nuclear expertise, but like it's very not appealing in the sense that they can just shut it down whenever, and that gives them great, power over the area. So one other thing I'll mention is there is this option of using something like a power ship where you could, if there were more power ships, and right now Russia really is the only one operating them, you could imagine a world where there's like numerous power ships that kind of are licensed in some flag nation. They can come in and sell power from offshore, and that's a way to kind of get involved really quickly without even having to build the plant on your shores. Like you can sort of bring in a plant, rent or purchase power from it. But when you do that, you will have your inspectors and your licensing people will have to go and inspect that ship to sort of allow it to be in your waters. And that's a good way to start building up a nuclear regulatory expertise without having, and you can get real hands-on regulatory and inspection and nuclear knowledge by working with that kind of a system. But that's a pretty slow ramp. Like certainly the downside there is that they can hoist anchor whenever. So you're still kind of dependent on them. But you can imagine in a world where there's numerous competing power ships where you could just get a better deal from someone else. So maybe you wouldn't be too tied. But that's all predicated on sort of a world that doesn't quite exist, where there's like economical power ships roving around. So I hope we get there, but we aren't quite there yet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your perspective. I think I will go to Dr. Marilu at this time. And we have seen that most times when developing countries are kind of, they try to go nuclear, and the first thing you hear is, are they going towards the US or they're going towards Russia? We see that coming up a lot. So Dr. Marilu, if you have any perspective on this.
Well, that's quite a big and open-ended question. I agree with what's been said already by our panelists. Ultimately, if you're asking a question about energy equity, well, to me, the most equitable thing is to have abundant energy available for all people to allow them to develop and thrive. In order to really allow the various technologies to shine, you have to have a free market in energy. In other words, if a country is open to different technologies, then you need to allow them to compete. And if nuclear is as great as I think it is, then let the developers be free to develop and show what value there is.
Okay, thanks for your perspective. And Terrence, maybe the final on this, if your take on this one.
Yes, Joseph, I will agree with the comments already made by the previous panelists. One thing I will allude to is that the World Association of Nuclear Operators, they're focused on topics like this to provide insight, to provide that type of capability. Just as Nick spoke to about having a design come into your country, it allows you to build up those resources where the individuals in those countries develop the expertise to operate those facilities from the compliance side, the design side, the licensing side, all the way up to the actual operation of the plant. But there has to be a starting point. And the free market that Mary Lou just spoke to allows you to have that type of insight. If your country is open to nuclear and what it takes for the fuel development, what it takes to develop the resources, bringing in the what I would say the construction part of those type things to build those facilities and understanding those design and developing those type of because the academia is there in most countries with the engineering and the architecture and those type of academia arenas support those folks who can operate those plants. But I will say a lot of the comments that our panelists have already made, and then also looking at what's already established by these associations like WANO, who are already looking at how you actually can collectively become self-sufficient as a company, as a country when it comes to nuclear power.
All right. Thank you all for your takes on this first question. My next question usually goes towards the area of security and control and all those areas. So I'll direct this one to Jacob and Dr. Mary Lou because they have worked in or they have some expertise in that area. How do you think professionals in the nuclear field balance the drive for innovation with the need to prevent weaponization or misuse of nuclear materials? This is in context of safeguards, right? What safeguards in this context, what I mean is what safeguards are in place to ensure that nuclear projects in low-income countries or politically unstable regions, they don't compromise environmental or community health. Now, I'll direct this one first to Jacob.
Sure. So thankfully, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, is very strong, and I think 180 countries or more have signed this NPT. So most developing countries who are interested in nuclear already have a legal obligation to have their nuclear facilities inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So the IAEA, they're responsible for monitoring nuclear facilities and all of the signatories to the NPT. And also, I think that this is something that isn't brought up, but in the NPT, the nuclear weapon states, who are US, Russia, China, UK, and France, they are legally required to facilitate the peaceful use of nuclear technologies to the non-nuclear weapon states. That was part of the draw why all of these countries signed it, because the weapon states were like, yes, we have weapons, but we will give you access to this technology if you agree not to pursue these nuclear weapons. So there is strong safeguards in place from that perspective. But from the scientific and technical person perspective, and I've talked to a lot of professionals who are working on reactor designs and all kinds of stuff like that. They take this stuff very seriously. They want to innovate and they want to get these reactors out as bad as everyone, but you also don't want to be the person who or the company who designs a reactor that's then used for a clandestine nuclear program, right? So you want to make sure that you are designing your reactor to be proliferation resistant. You want it to be easy for the IAEA to inspect, to make sure that none of the fuel is being diverted for a secret weapons program or anything of that nature. So I think that there are very strong safeguards in place, even in, less developed countries, and kind of this goes on to environmental and community health as well, because you also don't want to design a reactor that causes a radiation leak and harms this community in a developing country. So then no one else is going to buy your reactor, right? So there are a lot of scientists, yes, who are trying to innovate very fast, but they're all very concerned about these topics. And I think that we're in a good place talking about safeguarding these reactors even in developing countries.
All right, I'll call on Dr. Marilu. But in terms of countries signing up to NPT, so a country signs up to NPT, what if at some point they just say, okay, we are no longer part of this, right? What is the procedure? What happens from that point on?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I'll say I agree with everything Jacob said. We have a very established, a very robust experience for 60 years of the protocols, the regimes for detection of nuclear material, prevention of weapons proliferation, of protecting the public. And it's a very good reputation. So it's worked so far. We just need to continue that, allow it to evolve, to innovate. And for countries who are new into the nuclear industry, we need to allow and actually demand that those power plants be built to Western standards. Now, in terms of, okay, you sign on to the NPT and you withdraw, well, you sign on to the NPT, such as North Korea did, and then they withdraw. At that point, there's limited access by international agencies like the IAEA. So you really cannot control what's done there. However, if you are a country such as South Africa, for example, who upfront did not sign up for the Non-Proliferation Treaty because they clearly had developed nuclear weapons, but later on said, well, no, we really don't think we want these nuclear weapons. Now we're going to sign on. Ultimately, it's a voluntary thing by each country. And you agree to have inspections or you don't. If you agree to have inspections, then you're subject to what the inspectors wish to see. It's ultimately nobody's forcing anybody to do anything, but you have to be open and you have to be willing to defend if you're not open. It's really the best way, I think, to go about showing that you are accountable. And if you're not willing to show you're accountable, then how do you defend that to the people in your country?
Yeah. Can I just chime in? Can I jump? Just to add a little bit. I mean, like in the tools that if you withdraw and start developing nuclear weapons, then the rest of the world can sanction you, like they did with North Korea, and really limit your economic access in a way that can be devastating to the population, which is basically what has kind of happened. It's more complicated in North Korea than just that, but like that's the kind of thing. And then of course, you know, we've seen, everyone knows the examples of other places in the world where if you're not signed and someone thinks you're making nuclear weapons, then I mean, you can get into destructive acts where there will be airstrikes from someone, you know, who's most afraid of you or whatever. And it's certainly very destabilizing and kind of scary. So it's not perfect, but I mean, that's kind of what we've seen so far. So hopefully we hope that like if you get out and then there's sanctions put on you, then that will be enough to kind of get you to come back into the inspection regime, which is where we as a world think it's going to be most stable and safe and secure. So it's just, but yeah, it gets a little scary when you try to get out and it leads to basically acts of war. So that's a bit of a problem.
Okay, I think we've had a lot of discussion on this topic. We should now look at in terms of public trust when a country decides to go for nuclear, right? In your experience, Nick, what do you think is the biggest barrier to public trust in nuclear governance? And how can transparency or community engagement rebuild that trust?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers is, I mean, yeah, when people don't trust the authorities or the regulator, then that's a major breakdown. They're gonna think, well, they're sneaking something's happening at that plant, and there's an issue. And so this lack of trust in the regulator is a major problem. So one important thing is for each country to stand up. It's a regulator of people that are really trusted in the community, you know, in that country. That's the most important thing. And if that's a challenge, then one thing that I think is kind of nice these days, like what a lot of the conspiracy or a lot of the worry comes from the fact that radiation can't be sensed or detected by the human body. So there may be radiation, there may not be, and you can get scared about it because you have no way of knowing on your own. But we've seen interesting like social hardware, open source hardware where you can get a really cheap radiation detector and you can like have it hooked to a GPS or a phone, like an Android phone, and it maps out, it's taking radiation readings as people are driving around. And we've seen some kind of social organizations that build, there's one called, I think it's called Safecast, where you can get these like pretty cheap radiation detectors that drive around mapping it out. And so at that point, you're sort of giving the power of detection to the people. And this is not very expensive anymore. So really, I think it'd be nice if you could get a lot of Geiger counters to a lot of people around so they can kind of take their own measurements and see that the regulator's actually doing their job. I think that would go really a long way.
All right. Yeah, you talking of Geiger counters, I've seen in some talking points, and they've even said that you can easily get some online, very cheap ones. So that is enough to even detect radiation. But sometimes this can also, rather having a good effect, could rather have a bad effect as a negative effect, because somebody now detects that, oh, so I'm just walking around here, there's radiation
everywhere. Yeah, that could be, they may think it's from the plant. That's right.
Yes. Terrence, you can come in here and have your perspective on public trust.
Yes, from my perspective, I think Nick segued into a lot of things. I appreciate the way he said that as a person of the community, you can go out and buy tools to help self-detect and identify certain things. I think reinforcement to that also is what we have here in the United States. Our regulatory bodies like the NRC, they do inspections on all our operating facilities, and then also the facilities that either store nuclear waste or either other nuclear products. And from those are public documents, and they're provided to the public. They're able to read those and educate themselves on those type of reports. And then also too, our performance as operating facilities are rated by peers who are not at those facilities. So there's a high level of expertise that comes in and provides a critique that rates on how we're operating those plants. And then we are also governed by those type of inspections to bring in other individuals to help self regulate ourselves. So for example, if we have a bad operating cycle in a certain region of the country with a facility, we have ways of putting in other inspections to reinforce how to improve that plant's operation. And then also that is communicated out publicly to other facilities and operating facilities, and then also to the public. And it also goes into finding and also looking into how the leadership is also ensuring that the public is protected, because even though we are a generating station, our first focus is safety first and protecting our public and our community. So regardless of generating power, we're trying to make sure that our facilities operating on that type of safety. Also, we have community meetings, and they're not just random community meetings, they're structured community meetings where we have the regulator in place, we have the operating facility leadership team and personnel there, and then we have individuals from the public, and it's published in public information forms, newspapers, commercials, whatever the case may be. Those folks come to that area. We have a meeting. It's open dialogue agenda meeting, and we allow the public to voice any concerns that they may have. And as an operating facility, and then as the regulator, which we have three parts there, to make sure transparency is in place, those type of communications allow the community to feel that they understand that we're operating our facilities at the highest level of safety, and then also with the highest level of expertise. And then we also have a regulator who understands exactly what it takes to operate those facilities and make sure that we're meeting those criteria to safely operate. And just a little tidbit about our emergency planning. As Nick said, community can go out and get those Geiger counters, but we also do what we call drills and other safety regulatory mandated drills, where our emergency planning does just that. We have planted vegetations and locations throughout the community. We monitor those, report those back out. We also go out and drill on emergency planning on exactly how we communicate to the public if an event did occur, and then also exactly how we make sure we address any plumes or any directional radiation issues that may occur. So it's not just upon the operating facility, it's also upon what our regulatory bodies are that are within the United States, which is i.e. the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And then also, like I said before, we have what we call INPO, which is a bunch of our peers within the industry who come in and critique each facility to make sure we're doing what we need to do.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Dr. Merilu, I think you have your hand now.
Oh, still muted.
Dr. Merilu, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I lowered my hand but didn't unmute. Thank you. First of all, I agree with all the comments made, and thank you for those. And I applaud all of the efforts that Terrence described. I think they're very important and very effective. But I wanted to just suggest that maybe the mistrust or misunderstanding might be even a more fundamental, broader misunderstanding of what risk is, of relative risk. Risk is basically a combination of, well, how important is something in terms of, if this happens, what will the effect be on me? But also, what's the probability of this happening? I mean, we don't lose sleep over asteroids hitting your house because it's very improbable, very unlikely. You don't lose sleep over driving a car, but maybe you should because it's much more likely. Ultimately, having abundant clean energy, which is, I think, the big picture of what we're talking about here, having abundant clean energy versus not having it, and what the associated risks are, is really what needs to be considered. How are we getting enough energy? How are we getting that energy? And what are the risks associated with that versus the risk with not having that? Thanks for that.
Thank you.
To give an opinion.
Thank you for that update on. So looking at or hearing from Terrence and Nick and Dr. Merilu, looks as if a lot of this information is coming from its regional dependence, right? It could even be states. So from what Terrence was saying, looks as if that is where they are located. They would be required to do that because the state demands it, right? And then the US and other. But if you now take it in the global perspective, do you think there should be a universal set of nuclear safety and waste management standards enforced by international bodies like IAEA? Dr. Merilu, I think you can take that first.
Yes, thank you. So at least according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the US, standards are not advisory. They are required. It is true that NRC is sort of the gold standard for other countries to emulate, but it's really not it's not practical to expect global acceptance of one set of regulations. It's even more impractical to expect that global enforcement would happen. And while the NRC is the global standard, countries, including India, China, Russia, to expect them to accept enforcement by US or the International Atomic Energy Agency is impractical. I think the best approach is to lead by example, operate safely, demonstrate what a good regulatory environment looks like, and demonstrate that when you do that, you operate very safely.
Okay, thank you on that. Jacob, you can come in at this point.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Mary Lou said a lot that I agree with there. I think that it's impractical to expect there to be a regulatory authority that governs everyone on these topics. I don't think there's another industry that has something similar, like international standards for safety or waste management, although it would be nice, but I don't think it's realistic. Also, it's outside of the IAEA's purview. They're really only interested in non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. That's it. Although I'm sure they would like to do more of this. But I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking to earlier. I think that how you can improve regulation in these developing countries is to have the nuclear superpower going into these countries and helping them instead of just, building a plant, owning and operating a plant like Russia does. If you can go in at the beginning and help them develop their regulatory authority, being like, this is how we do it in the US. Here, maybe we can train some of your people. Here's like the kind of inspections that we do, things of that nature, and helping them develop their own workforce and capabilities. I think that's how you could have stronger regulation without having an international regulator that is responsible for doing this across the entire world.
Okay, I think I see Terrence and Nick both have their hands up. So, all right, Terrence. Yeah.
Yes, Nick, pardon me jumping in front of you a little bit there, but I saw your hand up, but I'm quite sure you'll close this out well. I just want to go ahead and kind of give a kudos to Jacob and Mary Lou on what they segued into. I just want to give an example of when the world experienced the accident in Fukushima. The world as a whole, especially in the US, we visited those sites and those locations and increased our ability to understand nuclear safety after an accident of that magnitude. With that being said, we haven't had an accident like that in the US, but we did upgrade our facilities in the US to meet those measures of anything to that magnitude occurred. Most facilities, they are built on accident scenarios that may occur in their area due to history, such as earthquakes and hurricanes or those type natural disasters or any kind of operating incidents. And what we gathered knowledge-wise and experience-wise from Fukushima is another example of, as Mary Lou said, the NRC being a gold standard of regulatory commitments. It also shows that we're able to reach out in an unprecedented event and learn from it and strengthen what we do as a nuclear science and a nuclear operating facility. And with that, furthermore, I see it also as opportunity for my career. It allowed us to build international relationships. So when it started, the building of the new plants of the AP 1000 here in the US, kudos to Southern Company and Vogel for getting that up operational. We learned a lot from that relationship back with Fukushima, and then also the implementation of a new operating facility here at the plant from those experiences. So I just want to give that little tidbit of information in there because I think Jacob and Mary Lou did an outstanding job of making those comments, and I want to give a real live application to where it hits the ground running.
Yes. So here we've had a few perspectives, and looks as though all of them are moving towards countries learning from others, right? From experience and all that. I think I'll call in Nick now to see his perspective on this.
Okay. Yeah, everyone wants to chime in on this one. Just wanted to add, I agree with everything. I think it is impractical to like expect enforcement. But one thing that we could do that I think would really help in this regard would be we have standards that everybody's supposed to follow, but every different organization is responsible for developing their own step-by-step procedures, which they give to staff to follow, to do certain things around the plant, whether it's in design, construction, operation, decommissioning, whatever. There's every different organization has its own procedure set, all of which comply to, if you follow these procedures, you'll meet the standards. Well, it'd be interesting to consider making basically a set of open source nuclear procedures that say like how to do certain things. Either, in design, it's how to do engineering calculations and reviews in a way that complies with some, the best standards, maybe the NRC related standards. And it could go on, and people could make them very efficient. You could put all the lessons learned about how to do it well, how to kind of not overdo it, keep it economical and also very high quality. And then if like an industry group were to build those and facilitate the open source kind of sharing of those, then other countries could come along, and instead of building their own procedures and learning all these lessons, which take years to really learn, they could start from like the top-notch, full-on procedures. And then if they follow, they'd like to use them because that's so much valuable information. And then by using them, they already would comply with the hardest, most stringent safety standards. So I think that may be like a pretty cool way to kind of get more people to be more safe in a way that's also kind of cost effective and efficient. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of takes on this. Let's try to turn our attention a little bit back to now waste and waste management areas, because that is what the group hosting this webinar, their interest lies a lot in the waste and waste management area. What responsibilities do current generations, right, that's our generation, hold toward the future ones when producing energy that generates waste lasting thousands of years? In context, I want to say that nuclear waste challenges the concept of long-term ethics, right? How do we protect people we may never meet, right? The future generations. How do we tend to protect them? And I think I should start with Dr. Merulu on this.
Thank you. Well, this is a very weighty question. First, I think it's important to recognize that all human activity generates waste. It's really a question of how valuable is that activity, is that process that's generating the waste. So wind and solar, for example, produce much more waste for each unit of electricity that's produced versus nuclear. And waste from coal and solar and wind is chemically toxic, which is toxic forever in terms of future generations, whereas nuclear waste is toxicity lessens over time. It really comes down to what's the value of the process, and then how do you manage that waste that's left behind? And that's a huge question. It's a very societal, procedural policy question. So have we, as a nuclear industry, managed the waste well? Have other industries, as they produce electricity, managed that waste well? I think I have the answer, but I think rather it's that question needs to be asked.
Okay, I'll call on Terrence, your perspective on this.
All right, I'm off mute now, and I will commend Mary Lou on her comments, and I'll segue into the fact of as an operating facility in the nuclear industry, we have taken upon ourselves to look at what we saw in our, I guess, in the past 30 years or so. We also tied into what our government saw as Yucca Mountain, which was at that point in time focused on a ultimate storage facility for our waste. Through the years, we've came to a point where we have started storing nuclear waste on site. And with that being the case, it afforded new technologies on how we could remove that nuclear waste from inside the facility outside to a safe storage area. We have monitoring a little bit more technical inclined than what Nick described as those folks around in the community having Geiger measures. But on the site, we have some instruments that we monitor on a daily basis, and we make sure we do the appropriate testing and everything to make sure that those on-site storage facilities for waste are maintained. We're able to store large amounts of that, considering the small amounts of waste that's produced by nuclear generation on site, and we're able to make sure that throughout years we're still developing technology to make sure that we safely be able to dispose of that waste, where we will have a very low impact on our future generations. And I also go back to something you talked about earlier, Joseph, when you talked about self-sustaining in global countries, about how you build those expertise in that area. There's also things in nuclear waste where we're building expertise on how to maintain that safely for future generations, and then also developing experts on the scientific level, and then also on the application level on how to maintain that waste. So it's not just about what we're shipping to storage facilities, but what we also maintaining on site, and then also in the academic arena on how we're able to manage nuclear waste. So from operating point, I'm smiling a lot. I like how Miss Mary Lou said that I have some answers. She didn't quite give them all at this point in time because we are still developing some of those, but we do have some in place, what I alluded to with the on-site storage, and also how we graduated from Yucca Mountain to where we are today on managing nuclear waste.
All right. So yeah, we do see it's still work in progress, or work in process. It's still something that is we are still working on, but there's a lot of encouragement from what we are seeing from research in this area, right? Just to add to that same question for Jacob and Nick. So how can we communicate the realities of nuclear waste? That is its risk, cost, and benefits in a way that engages rather than alienate the public.
All right, I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time communicating about waste. It's the main thing people ask about. I've had this website, What is Nuclear, for 20 years, and the most popular page is What is Nuclear Waste? And I've tried many things, and so I kind of see what helps. And I think it's useful to talk about the perspective, as Mary Lou was alluding to, like how much nuclear waste is there really? And so doing visuals that show, the football field and how much nuclear waste is stacked on that. I went ahead and kind of did some calculations and published them on my website to sort of show how high it would be in different assumptions. Lots of people, and I have little 3D renders of it, and those are interesting. And I think people say like, okay, so you're just talking about that much nuclear waste. And yeah, it's a significant amount, but it's not, it's millions of times less than what you would have from coal waste or whatever that we're just dumping into the air and breathing in. So that kind of a perspective is interesting. Now, but you can't just say, don't worry about it. It's real small. We'll just bury it. It's fine. Geologists all agree. You also, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a hazardous material. I think you should say like, yeah, this stuff is pretty interesting. I mean, it's pretty exotic and it's dangerous. And so you have to protect yourself against it. And having radiation shielding that's in these spent storage facilities, showing how that works and describing the safety basis of that and how successful it's been, I think it's valuable. So you can say that like, yeah, it's very hazardous material. It does get less hazardous over time. We store it in these things, we track it all, and there's this much of it. And we think the right thing to do is to put it in a deep geologic repository for this long. And I think people buy that. I think it's a coherent story, and if you sort of sit there and explain it in a way that is patient and let people ask questions, then generally people will say like, okay, that actually doesn't sound that bad, and present the alternatives. It's not like we're doing make nuclear waste or do nothing. It's make nuclear waste or do all the other things that we do to generate electricity, all of which have some kind of negative externality. So that's how I think about it.
Okay, then Jacob.
Yeah, so I think about this question in terms of if you're going to a community or you're developing like a nuclear power plant or a waste facility or something like this, and you're going to the community and discussing it with them. I think it's important when you're having these discussions with the community to provide pros, cons, what are the benefits, what are the potential risks, and just try and provide clear information to them. You don't want to go into this community and act like, this is a sales pitch, like we're a used car salesman trying to sell you this nuclear power plant. Like that's not what we want to come across as. We want to give you clear, reliable, true information about what's happened in the past. What if past communities that have hosted this kind of facility, what have they said? Like, can you have testimonials from them, for example? About what was good for their community and maybe what was bad. And then the community themselves can decide, is this facility good for us? Is it bad for us? Is this something we want to do? So I think a little switch in that mindset would be very helpful. And I think kind of something that I've learned at talking to people about nuclear in general, not only waste, is that I think sometimes when you're an expert and you're talking about, like, you kind of come across as you're trying to educate people, and that can come across as condescending even if you don't mean it that way. So like changing it to I'm not educating you, but I'm trying to provide you information, I found that so much more successful in my experience. Like, you are an educated person. I'm just trying to provide you the information I have, and then you can make the decision that's best for you and your community. And I think we have to do that about waste as well. Just be realistic about, what is actually going on, what are the potential risks, and like what are we as scientists doing to make sure that we are mitigating the risk as much as possible.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. So for the waste team, you just kind of know we should be sending the students rather than us going to rather try to educate the public, right? The students go and it's much more better. Okay, Dr. Merilu, I think I see your hand up.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I think the panelists are in violent agreement over these issues. In terms of communicating, obviously the first thing is listening as opposed to talking. And nobody likes to be told that they need to be educated. That's just offensive and a little bit condescending. So I agree wholeheartedly. So really, it's a matter of listening and what are the concerns that people have, trying to address those concerns. Back to, relative risks and what really is risky, what really is harmful. I think it's important to, first of all, state, here is our history with storing and managing waste from nuclear power plants, and it is stellar. I mean, we are really good at this. We have done a great job. Nobody has been harmed from what we have done. Let's just keep doing that. But secondly, making it human. A few years ago, there was a great story in Newsweek that showed something that I was trying to say for years. Oh, when I was pregnant with my children, I went to work every day and I worked at a nuclear facility. Okay, but that's me talking blah, blah, blah. But this was a Newsweek article that showed this beautiful young woman with her baby bump hugging a spent fuel cask, showing, hey, if this isn't safe, why would I possibly expose my unborn baby to this? Just getting that story out there and making it human, I think is the best way to communicate this and anything for that matter.
Okay, yeah, we've had a lot of experience from our panelists on this topic. Because we are running out of time here, so I will skip one question. I'll probably go to my one more question before we take that from the audience. Okay. Yes. So when we think about nuclear education, what is your perspective on how we should or how we should diversify this, right? Trying to see for universities, for industry pipelines, how can we diversify this and get students in the nuclear pipeline? Dr. Merilu.
Thank you. Well, yes, I am a chronic educator. I'm a chronic communicator. In an earlier life, I was a high school teacher, and I eventually went into nuclear. But what I really think is important for people to understand is nuclear is not about nuclear engineering exclusively. If you go to a nuclear power plant, there might be one or two nuclear engineers. That's it. I mean, they don't need much of me. What they need are people to be there and operate the plant. You need lots of people who do things like administrative tasks, security, communications, procurement, project management, machinists, technicians, plumbers. My father-in-law was an electrician who learned how to be an electrician in the Navy, and he helped build nuclear power plants in this country during his career. This message really needs to be shared throughout the educational community, throughout the industry community, that it's just recognizing that it takes many different people with many different areas of expertise to create the workforce for nuclear, to create the electricity that we need to have abundant, affordable electricity to thrive as a human society.
Okay, thank you for your perspective. Terrence?
Yes, I think Mary Lou did a great job of giving you a great overview of that diversity. And being at an operating facility myself, it really I graduated from South Carolina State University with an electrical engineering technology degree. And I have had the opportunity to work with peers at the facility who came from very diverse backgrounds. As she just said, she had a relative who was in the Navy. There's a lot of Navy, ex-Navy personnel who are operators, who work in the maintenance areas and also go on to work in the engineering fields or the other technical fields within the facility. So in short sentence, that diversity goes across the board. We talked about compliance, individuals who have the ability to read, understand those standards, translate those standards on exactly how those procedures reinforce those standards and allow us to operate the facility safely. So there's a wealth of diverse opportunities there in the facility. And also as a corporation, we have a certain level of responsibility to reach back into the universities and the colleges and the technical schools and bring information to allow those students who are studying diverse majors, allow them to understand the pathway to our industry. We always seeking the best and the brightest. We also looking for new talent, and that can come from any degreed area at these university and colleges and technical schools, and also down to the high school level. Let me also speak to that. We go into the bring students from high school levels into the facility, allow them to look at our simulator, which is basically a mirror image of our control room. Let them see those type of technologies and exactly what it takes to operate those facilities, to give them that exposure, to give them questions and about how can I get into this field. It's not always engineering. Mary Lou did a great job of saying nuclear engineers, we do have a pool, but it's you don't have to have a nuclear engineering background or a science background to be a very effective contributor at these facilities. But the ability to learn at a high level is what I've learned in my career at these facilities that actually allows diversity to be great. And as we allow folks to be exposed to nuclear power and nuclear science and also how we operate the facilities, I think that is one of the best ways of making our workforce and also the ability for the nuclear industry to be more diverse. Um, I never knew what a regulator was when I graduated from South Carolina State. I learned very quickly when I started working at VC Summer Nuclear Station exactly what a regulator was. And I do appreciate them because they do outstanding. One reason why I went into quality assurance and compliance. But I do encourage anyone in the academic field to take a look at nuclear industry and nuclear science and really just take a very diverse perspective on it and see if it's something that could drive me to be empowered to be one of those next leaders in our industry.
Okay, Jacob, I want your perspective on this before I go to Nick.
Yeah, so I think as a PhD student and working at Sandia, I have worked with all kinds of people from different countries, from different backgrounds within the US, with different degrees. And I think that having diverse perspective just makes everything so much better when you're working as a team, because if you have a different experience than me, you are bringing different ideas to the table. And that makes, ideas like what actually happens in the project, you can potentially have better ideas, or like you can communicate with each other and teach each other new things. So from a university perspective, I think that researchers, most of us generally agree that diversity is good. And I think that that part isn't so difficult. But I think that getting a diverse population into doing the like technical or the like trade aspects of it, like welders or electricians or things like that, I think that's maybe the challenge a bit more, because those fields already struggle with kind of diversity. But if we can really put kind of a emphasis on that for nuclear and trying to reach out to some of these communities who aren't as well represented in the trades, I think that we could potentially advertise like, hey, these are really good jobs. You can make a really good career doing this. And like we're wanting, to hire people. So in turn, we both get something. Like these underrepresented communities get the access to this good job and education and skills. And the nuclear industry, we get all of these like diverse ideas and populations to help us like build this new nuclear fleet that we want. So I think that's where we should put kind of our efforts in terms of diversification in the US.
All right. And
Yeah, go.
Nick on the final, because I know you do a lot of education in schools, going around schools and talking through this. So let me see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like one thing that would be beneficial, you just got to go where people are. Like if all people need is an interest. Like if you can engage someone and say something that's going to spark an interest in them, they're going to be able to go and put some attention into it and excel at whatever they want to do. So it's like it may not be all at science class. Like you may want to do outreach at like a church or like a sporting event or at Boy Scouts or just places that are a little bit less conventional for like science outreach to like really help diversify who's really like getting exposed to just interesting information about nuclear power. And then of course on social media we've started seeing various people do nuclear outreach on TikTok and Instagram as opposed to whatever, Facebook or the web page that I've been doing for 20 years. So it's been really nice to see, a lot of my friends have started doing big TikTok pages and they've gotten great responses and reached people that like I was not reaching just having a HTML website from 20 years ago with a bunch of words on it. So yeah, just finding the social media, internet places, and also the in real life places where people are and trying to do outreach. Be creative about where you go to do your outreach, and you'll find there's lots of people everywhere who are potentially interested in this kind of a topic, and that'll lead to a great career.
Okay, I think we're running out of time here. I had one last question, which was just a kind of yes or no answer, but I'll let Miss Anaya come in and see if we have any questions from our audience, online audience. Miss Anaya?
Hello. If you guys could please use the Q&A feature to put in some questions, that would be great.
Okay, so right now we don't have any curious audience at this point, right?
We do not.
Okay. So one final question for panelists, and this is kind of a yes, no.
Dr. Wilkie?
Yes.
Dr. Mary Lou has her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
It's really hard for me to not say something because I'm so passionate about nuclear, and I am very passionate about communicating in general, but also about nuclear. But I think what I would like to say is very consistent with what our other panel members have said, and Nick saying, we need to go to different groups of people and just explain what the situation is. And I think in doing that, we need to just say, like, step back and say, but what is the goal here? Is the goal nuclear? Well, no, in my humble opinion, we need to step back even further. What is the goal? It's abundant and affordable energy, because that enables people to thrive. And all forms of electricity should be allowed to compete and provide that benefit to the extent that they can. It's important to raise the standard of living, the health and education and employment options of people struggling, not only in our own country, but in countries that are less fortunate at this point. And that's, again, I think it's more important that we have that abundant energy than to worry about future impacts of how that electricity is produced. I am pro-nuclear, but I am not anti-fossil fuels. Fossil fuel plants are relatively inexpensive to build, but you have to look forward. So the cost of the fuel is unsure. It might go up, it might go down, and it's a bigger part of how you produce that electricity. Nuclear power plants are very expensive to build, no question about it, but the fuel cost is very predictable and very small during the whole lifetime of the plant. So across all the life cycle of power plants, nuclear and fossil are quite competitive. What is your goal? Do you want to have affordable, abundant energy? Of course you do. Do you want that in a way right now that is carbon free? Then you have to invest up front for nuclear. If you just right now just need to develop your society and your infrastructure, then maybe that CO2 free isn't your goal. You just have to decide what your goal is and you go there.
Okay. Yeah, I had a technical issue, slight technical issue here, but I think it's back up now. And I want to believe you have one question from the audience. So, Miss Anaya.
Yes, we do. So, to our panelists, what is some advice that you would give a potential nuclear engineering student or just someone that's wanting to get into the nuclear industry?
Yeah, just briefly, like one cool thing about nuclear, I struggled to decide what to major in early on, and I went with nuclear, and I'm glad I did because nuclear is interesting on its own. There's tons of cool jobs, blah, blah. But even if you don't end up doing nuclear, it's still pretty good to have a nuclear degree because nuclear education is quite general. You hit a lot of other types of engineering like mechanical, electrical, civil to a degree. And there's sort of even though nuclear isn't technically harder than mechanical or electrical or whatever else engineering, it still kind of has an aura about it. People are like, "Ooh, you do nuclear? You must be really smart." And that kind of goes a long way. People just like assume you're really smart if you have a nuclear degree, and that can actually lead to opportunities for better or worse if you want to leave the industry. I have lots of friends who have nuclear degrees and got big jobs at other, in totally other industries. And they're smart people and they did it on their own. But I think having that nuclear background is just a good general baseline that can get you into lots of other things as well. So it's kind of you don't have to do nuclear just to have the nuclear education. So that's one little thing I learned.
All right. I think we're almost out of time here. So I'll ask the last question, which is just a yes or no, and probably a 30 seconds explanation to your answer. Okay. When we think of climate change, should access to nuclear technology be considered a right in the fight against climate change, or just a privilege that must be earned through strict compliance? Just a yes or no, and then your maybe 30 seconds explanation. That should be fine. Yeah. Nick, once you're on, I think you can just start. I can start with you.
Oh, me first. Okay. I think it should be considered a right for sure. I mean, any country, yes. So yes, it should be a right, but a right that has some. You have like you don't anyone should be able to do it, but you have to jump through some hoops to be able to do it. You have to be able to set up an appropriate quality assurance environment and a regulator in order to do it. So that's my answer.
Okay, Jacob.
Yeah, I think that the answer is pretty clear in terms of the international law in this. If you are a signatory to the NPT, then it is a right for you to develop nuclear energy in your country, but you also have to follow the strict guidelines that are given by the IAEA. Now, I don't think that those are overly restrictive, but those are the current rules, and so I think that's a pretty good setup, and these countries do have the right to develop nuclear energy.
Okay, Terrence.
I'm in line with the yes, and then also too, I would just reinforce that with the fact of the matter that the technologies in itself, with the standards that help with the development of those technologies, provide certain regulatory commitments that will allow those individuals to have access to it and take away the privilege piece, and then also too, it allow them to be compliant with those standards to make sure it's safely operated at the point in time of for use.
Okay, and our final panelist, Dr. Mary Lou.
Thanks for that. You mentioned nuclear technology. So within 30 seconds, gosh, I can't begin to explain what nuclear technology is. It's so much more than nuclear power. It's medicine, it's manufacturing and agriculture. All right, so I think what you actually meant was nuclear power. So if you want nuclear power in your country, well, you petition your government to say, no, allow that technology to come here and establish the technology. Nuclear technology is not a fundamental right or a privilege. It's a service that can be provided, and you decide if that service is of value or it is not. I think it is.
Okay, we've run out of our questions. I do see one Q&A, and I think I'll just give Ms. Anaya to ask that question and maybe just one answer from a panelist, and then we can end it from there. Okay, Ms. Anaya, if you're on.
We actually have two more questions, if you don't mind. The first one is nuclear energy being used within agriculture? If so, how does it compare to other energy sources?
Okay, who wants to pick on that? Dr. Melu, okay.
Okay, Nick just gave me 30 seconds and I'll defer to you. Okay, well, nuclear power, nuclear energy in industry, well, I mean, they use electricity from whatever source it is, but there are so many applications of nuclear technology in industry, from creating disease and drought-resistant seeds and crops to managing pests. So, you know, what sort of insects are really impeding the growth of your crop? Well, we can create a way to impact those pests and limit their reproduction. It's quite a wide variety of things in agriculture. Over to you, Nick.
We were just supposed to do one. Oh, well, yeah, very quickly, like a topical, there's the screwworm fly is back, and it's all over the news. And we originally eradicated it by irradiating the hell out of a bunch of the flies back in the 60s with cobalt-60 gamma rays. We basically sterilized them. We dumped them out of airplanes across the whole southeast. And so that we may need to do that again. That's a radioisotope thing. Now, I will say nuclear isn't really being used to its potential. There were ideas back in the 60s to basically go into arid lands and build big nuclear power plants, hook them up to desalination plants and desalinate a couple billion gallons of water a day and use that to irrigate the arid land and turn it into these industrial farms, which would produce food for millions of people. Like, these were real serious proposals. And so those are the kind of things you can do that we certainly have not done. But with especially with if you make economical nuclear power, very economical power, then you can do that kind of sort of crazy thing where you just you make more farmland in these otherwise pretty arid areas. So that's kind of a fun idea.
So here's the story. If you want to control pests for crops, or if you want to control the spread of mosquitoes that spread malaria, you irradiate the eggs, and somehow magically you're able, I'm not a biologist, but you're able to separate the male and female eggs. You radiate the eggs, and then the males are born, but they're sterile. And then you set them free. Fly, be free. But of course, they go off and they think they're making baby mosquitoes or baby pests that are impeding crops, and they're not. And it's a very really nice way to do it. There are no chemicals involved. It's very effective. So it speaks to what Nick just mentioned, but it's also effective for agriculture, public health, and so on.
All
Okay,
right.
thank you so much for that answer. And we have run out of time, actually. So I would just like to say thank you to our panelists, and I hope you guys have enjoyed.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining this session, and we should very likely have another session with a similar topic on Wednesday, and I hope everyone joins in. I had a technical issue, and so my picture is, or my video now is blurry. I don't know how to fix it now, but I hope I get it working by the time we get when it's Wednesday. Thank you everyone for joining in, and We wish you a good evening.
Thank you all.
So
Have a good
Thanks a lot. Take care.